our think tank tonight get their reaction to all of this. Joining us in Atlanta, Georgia, criminal defense attorney Michael Bixon. In the Bronx, New York, criminal defense attorney Renee Hill. And in Minneapolis, Minnesota, show host for Real Talk with Roshini on WCCO Radio. Roshini Rajkumar is with us. Great to have everyone here. Thank you for joining me. Ladies, I'm going to start with Michael first, if you don't mind. Michael Bixon, this seemed to me to be a devastating day for the defense. Do you agree, and can they possibly recover from what happened in that courtroom today?
Vinny, Dr. Tobin knocked it out of the park, and there's no other way to put it. The defense is really going to have to struggle to come back from this. I think they're going to have to bring their own experts to at least match what he did today. Because at least from the cross-examination that we saw, it was not enough to, I think, deter the jury, and certainly not to bring out the arguments that the state did by bringing him on the stand. Dr. Tobin did an amazing job. You know,
Renee, I'm very skeptical usually of experts. You know, it's kind of a wash. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I know what you're going to say. I kind of know what you're going to say. And let me figure it out myself, because you've got all these qualified people. Something was different about this guy. There was something different, Renee.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I really, really enjoyed his testimony. He was personable. He was knowledgeable. He explained to the jury in layman's terms exactly what happened to George Floyd. And he connected the actual death that they witnessed on the video. He really connected it for them and walked them through it step by step. And he really brought a different feeling to what they have been seeing over the course of this trial already. And he knocked it home just like Michael said. He knocked it out of the box. It was the mic drop. This was the best witness for the prosecution thus far.
You know, Roshini, as I'm watching him in the courtroom today, it's like watching you doing a TED Talk. Took over the room. Room.
You know, I agree with Michael and Renee on one level, and that is he really was a great witness. He took the jurors by the hand without taking them by the hand, because, of course, he can't touch them. But it's very clear that he is a professional witness. He knows what he's talking about. That light accent that he's got going on. I mean, very charming on top of it. But one thing that I want to point out is, why were there these two medical witnesses today, the day before the heaviest hitter, Dr. Baker, tomorrow? So there's some strategy in that they're trying to give you every sort of possibility that's focused toward the prosecution before the very man who did that actual initial autopsy gets on the stand.
I mean, Roshini, isn't it because Dr. Baker's testimony is not going to be exactly what prosecutors want in this case?
Exactly, Vinny. That is part of it. And this guy today, Dr. Tobin, very relatable, very conversational, and he really did a good job for the prosecution. And then it really didn't help that Eric Nelson was having, talking issues and needed water and that kind of stuff. Just visually, that never helps. But I do really want to see what Dr. Baker has to say tomorrow.
Okay. Something else, Michael, that Dr. Tobin was able to do today, which is sort of head off some of this momentum we've seen over the past couple of days from the defense on a couple of different issues, one of which was, where was Derek Chauvin's knee? Let's take a listen.
In terms of with Officer Chauvin with his left knee on the neck, his right knee on Mr. Floyd's arm and chest, and then you can see here Officer Lane holding his legs, and then you can see Officer King with his knee on his torso.
So this represents a snapshot in time, as you told us. Did the officers' positions change over time as they were there on the ground?
Yes, the officers' positions changed over time, and also the position of Mr. Floyd himself changed over time, and these become relevant in how we evaluate everything.
And was it something you factored into your analysis then?
Yes.
Did you consider where Mr. Chauvin's left knee was during the encounter?
Yes. For Officer Chauvin's left knee is virtually on the neck for the vast majority of the time.
All right, Michael. I think it's an important issue because I think the whole story is about a knee on the neck. And he's now saying a majority of the time. How do you think the jury determines this issue? Are they going to watch the video over and over? Are they going to be influenced by Dr. Tobin?
No, absolutely. I think this testimony is going to stick with them for the rest of this trial. I think these graphics did a great job at explaining the intricacies of it. It wasn't just, sort of a knee on the neck for 9 minutes. It was how he did it, how he had just one knee on and how that sort of increased the weight. And I think he did a great job of explaining to them, not just sort of this clear, concise picture, but the little details I think they're going to take back with them when they're actually making their determination.
All right, I want to listen to more of what Dr. Tobin spoke about today. Another big issue in this case is fentanyl and drugs and whether or not they played a role in the death of George Floyd. Obviously, the defense, this is a big issue for them. It was addressed by Dr. Tobin. Take a listen.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
So that was roughly a 17-second clip,
Right?
and you counted 7 or 8 breaths.
Between 7 and 8. Yeah.
And did you use this to calculate a rate of respiration?
Yes, because it's simple. Once you have 19 seconds and you count out the number of breaths you have here, and if say you count out 7 breaths, that will come out at a respiratory rate of 22.
Is that number, the respiratory rate of 22, significant to this case?
It's extremely significant
Why is that?
because one of the things in this case is the question of fentanyl. And if fentanyl is having an effect and is causing depression of the respiratory centers, the centers that control breathing, that's going to result in a decrease in the respiratory rate. And it's shown that with fentanyl, you expect a 40% reduction in the respiratory rate. So with fentanyl, his respiratory rate should be down at around 10. Instead of that, it's right in the middle at normal at 22.
All right, Renee, first on the fact that you're counting George Floyd's breaths and his respiratory rate in front of this jury through that video. What's the impact of that?
That is extremely impactful on this jury. Again, as I stated before, this is really bringing it home for this jury and bringing them back to those moments so that they can actually experience almost what George Floyd was going through and what the bystanders were going through actually watching it there on the sidewalk. So by him walking them through it, breath by breath, having them count or counting for them, and they can actually see now on the video where his body moves up and down with those breaths, that is extremely powerful.
Now, Rashini, the purpose of that testimony was to undermine the fentanyl argument. Getting back to Dr. Baker, the Hennepin County medical examiner, he apparently told someone if there were no other, if George Floyd was found in a room, he would have been comfortable ruling it an overdose.
Well, and that's the thing. The drug piece of this is what I found a little harder to believe today from both of the medical witnesses because of the things I've read in the coroner's in that report from Dr. Baker, as well as some other analysis of that report. So I think using this witness today for this purpose really helps to brunt the fact that the prosecution knows the defense will really focus on the drugs. And as Renee pointed out, Dr. Tobin, very believable. He walks us through it in this very matter-of-fact kind of way, but a very just slow and deliberate way that's not trying to talk over the jury, but really helping them to understand. And that makes him believable. But those of us who've really studied some of the toxicology on this, it isn't a slam dunk for the prosecution.
All right, we've got a lot more to get through from today. Our guests will stay with us. We've got more big moments next.
Now, Dr. Tobin, were or are you aware that Mr. Floyd had some pre-existing health conditions?
Yes, I am.
And how are you aware of that?
I mean, I read them in the records from Hennepin County, and obviously also saw them mentioned in the autopsy.
Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether a person who had none of those pre-existing health conditions, a healthy person, would have died under the same circumstances as Mr. Floyd?
Yes, a healthy person subjected to what Mr. Floyd was subjected to would have died as a result of what he was subjected to.
That's a bold statement made by Dr. Tobin. Let's bring back to the think tank Renee Hill. To me, this is an absolutely, I mean, it's opening a door saying what Chauvin did that day would kill anyone, would kill anyone. Is there any way for the defense to come back on that? I mean, I happened to see a prominent YouTuber did the whole thing, got on the ground, 9.5 minutes, 2 people on top of him. And I was thinking, wow, because I think back to the Scott Peterson case where Mark Garagos wanted to do some experiments for the jury to reenact something. Is that a possibility in a case like this where the door's been opened this wide by this expert?
I don't believe so, Vinny. That would be extremely dangerous. I don't think the court would permit it. It just would not be a good look, and it just would not be good. You would not.
What
want
if
to
you had
see
it on
someone in the
video?
courtroom.
What if you had it on video?
Even if I think that it still would not fly. I would not want to do that, even as defense counsel. That's not something that I would.
So how do you come back from it when he says what Chauvin did would have killed anyone?
It's going to be extremely hard. This is a very, very difficult witness for the defense. And Mr. Nelson, he's doing his job. He's doing the best that he can. He's taking each witness, one witness at a time, and he's picking apart what he can. And he's going to need to bring an expert in there, and hopefully his expert for him will be strong enough to say, well, that's not actually the case. Because if you have someone who weighs this amount and it's someone else, and and then start matching up what the weights are and what the force is, he may be able to save it a little bit. But it's going to be an uphill battle for him based upon how this witness testified today.
Rashidi, you think he was biting off a little bit too much there in saying this would kill anyone? And, you start to put some of the math together, and the amount of force that is on George Floyd seems to me to be a little difficult to precise. He was very precise in how many pounds were on the neck of George Floyd. And I'm wondering if there's going to be experts out there saying, you can't figure that out from a video.
I believe absolutely there will be experts who say that Dr. Tobin went a little overboard with that statement. The other thing that I'm looking for when the defense has its case in chief is they will start the timeline from the moment those 2 rookie officers came in contact with George Floyd. That is video that, yes, we've seen some of it, but in the sequence of that night, the knee on the neck video, which is dramatic and terrible, we would all agree, was several minutes in to this encounter. So the defense is most likely going to really try to get the jury to look at how they found George Floyd, how those officers first were trying to give him help and listen to him. And he was saying, I can't breathe, long before that knee was on the neck. So that is where I see the defense going. And I think it is too early, Vinny, to be saying this is all lost for the defense. I mean, it doesn't look good after today's testimony, but we're always focused on that knee on the neck video. And that is not the entire sequence of events.
Now, there was some cross-examination of Dr. Tobin, and there was one, I thought, interesting moment where I think we got a preview of at least where one of the experts will go when it comes to the issue of fentanyl for the defense. Let's take a listen.
If partially ingested pills that were determined to contain both fentanyl and methamphetamine were found partially ingested in the back seat of the squad car, and that those pills had the DNA of the deceased individual on them, meaning that they took them, and those pills would have been in his mouth at about 218 or 2018, right? Is it fair to say that you would expect the peak fentanyl respiratory depression within about 5 minutes?
Right. I mean, obviously, it would depend on how much of it was ingested. I mean, just finding the pills won't tell you anything about whether any of it was ingested or some of it or anything. But if there was any amount of it ingested, yes, the peak would be 5 minutes.
Right. And so if it happened at 2018 or thereabouts, when the individual was in the back of the car, you would expect that peak respiratory depression to be around 2013, right? 2023, I'm sorry. 2018 to 2023 is
You're trying
fine.
to really confuse me, Mr. Nelson.
I'm sorry. I think I can actually say it's been a long week now. So 2018 is the ingestion point. You would expect peak respiratory depression by 2023.
Correct.
Right? That's the peak, meaning that it could continue afterwards, right?
Right.
All right, Michael Bixon, it seems they're going to put together a timeline on how long it takes for that fentanyl to take effect on George Floyd. And my guess is it's somehow going to match up with the time codes that we see on the body cam videos.
Yeah, I mean, for the defense, this is a crucial part of their case. And if they're able to actually establish a timeline down to the minute, that's wonderful for them. I think that's going to absolutely be a crucial part of their case and a really big problem for the prosecution. And it's good that I think they were able to get some of this out a little bit in advance, especially with all the testimony that went against their side of the case today. So this line of questioning, I think, was excellent on their part. I do think they could have been a little bit more aggressive on cross, especially with what we were just talking about, like the speculative statements. But this portion itself, I think, again, is crucial to their case.
Renee, one other thing that I noticed from that clip and other parts today, and I think Roshini mentioned it as well, is Eric Nelson, it's like 1 against 14, right? There's all this incredible prosecution team. They rotate in and out. Sometimes they're in the courtroom, sometimes they're not, each taking little pieces of the case. I mean, he's carrying his whole load. He's got a helper. He obviously has an helper, but he's the sole voice in the courtroom. Looked a little tired today, Renee.
Yeah, he did. He looked like he was struggling today. And, you know, it's not easy, Vinny. Like you said, the prosecution has all these people helping them. They can split up the witnesses. They can prepare fully for each witness. And Mr. Nelson is doing it all himself. So he is tired. He's got to go home at night. He's got to look at what happened today. And then he can't, you know, say that he took a loss today. He can't focus on that right now. He's got to be prepared for the witnesses that are coming tomorrow. So he has to know, you know, what they testified to previously in the grand jury in the event that he wants to impeach them if he can. He's got to be on his toes, thinking on his feet as to what they say in court at that moment. And he's doing it all by himself, even though he has a helper, but he's the one who's crossing all of these witnesses. And it is a difficult job. So it's wearing on him. We're 2 weeks into this trial, and you can see that it's wearing on him.
Yeah, I mean, there's no comparison, but I had a case. It was a drug possession with intent, and there were 3 defendants, so 3 defense attorneys, 1 against 3. I missed 2 weeks of work after that little 5-day trial. I can't imagine what Eric Nelson is doing. All right, when we come back, a lot of testimony today, but who had a better day? Was it the prosecution or defense? I think I have an idea of what some people might say, but let's figure it out. Think Tank will give their verdict when we return.
So let's talk about your opinions with respect to this case. Have you formed an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty on the cause of Mr. Floyd's death?
Yes, I have.
Would you please tell the jury what that opinion or opinions are?
Yes, Mr. Floyd died from a low level of oxygen, and this caused damage to his brain that we see, and it also caused a PEA arrhythmia that caused his heart to stop.
If Mr. Chauvin is applying pressure on the side of the neck, as we see here in Exhibit 943, how does that translate into narrowing of the hypopharynx?
It's going to depend on what is the orientation of Officer Chauvin's body, what is the orientation of his leg, and then also in particular into what is the orientation of Mr. Floyd. The lungs are smaller than they were because they fall, we know, when you turn prone. And then you also see now that the area, the hypopharynx, is further narrowed because the lungs, as they get smaller, they have less effect in keeping that open. And so that gets smaller. And then we have the knee on the back, and now we see with the knee on the back, then the lungs become further reduced, like I showed you for the precise calculations of the volumes. And now you see here is the size of the hypopharynx further is shrunk as a result of it. So the opening through the hypopharynx is impacted by the knee on the back.
The Minneapolis police lieutenant who trains Minneapolis police officers testified that it is frequently said and trained to police officers that a person can talk, it means they can breathe. You would have a problem with that.
Yes, I mean, they're able to breathe at that moment in time, but 10 seconds later, they may be dead.
Right. And because dealing with any person is a rapidly evolving situation that can change from second to second.
Yes.
So the most notable findings in the hospital blood was the presence of fentanyl at 11 nanograms per milliliter. And then the metabolite of fentanyl, the breakdown product of fentanyl, norfentanyl, at a concentration of 5.6 nanograms per milliliter. In addition, we found methamphetamine at 19 nanograms per milliliter.
What is significant about that amount of norfentanyl?
Well, it shows that some of the fentanyl was metabolized to norfentanyl. It also could mean there was pre-existing norfentanyl with additional fentanyl given on top of that. But it basically shows that when we see very recent deaths with fentanyl, we frequently see fentanyl with no norfentanyl whatsoever, because after a very acute fentanyl intoxication, the body doesn't have time to break it down.
And you described when you see a fentanyl overdose, typically you may not see any norfentanyl or low levels of norfentanyl.
Correct.
Could you tell us about the importance of timing with respect to performing CPR?
The sooner we start compressions and ventilations, the higher, the more successful our resuscitation rates will be.
At what point should CPR have been commenced with respect to Mr. Floyd?
Way before it was. As soon as Mr. Floyd is unconscious, he should have been rolled over. We have documentation on the video that the officer says, "I can't find a pulse." Why? That's clearly, but when you look at the video, it should have been started way before. Should have been rolled over, checked his respirations. But clearly, when they can't find a pulse, CPR should have been started.
All right, last night, for the first time in this trial, the think tank came back unanimously and said the defense had a better day. But how about today, prosecution or defense? Let's check back in with our think tank. Michael Bixon, I'll begin with you. Who had a better day?
Today was a very, very different day for the prosecution. Their expert, like I said before, knocked it out of the park. I mean, his accent alone certainly didn't hurt. But overall, he did a fantastic job at explaining complex scientific principles to the jury in a way I think they're going to take back with them when they're making their deliberations. I mean, whenever you bring in an expert, it's always tough to make sure that, not only are they explaining these tough scientific principles, but also that they're able to relate to a jury. I think he did an excellent job of it. So overall, without a doubt, today is the prosecution.
Renee Hill, prosecution or defense?
Today was the prosecution's day, hands down. They, put on this witness who was able to relate to the jury and explain everything to them very methodically, very personally. And he is heading the defense off at the pass. He is anticipating where they're going with their arguments. They're doing an excellent job with bringing out the bad facts from their witnesses and explaining it as to what is happening and why, yes, there are some bad facts here, but this is the reason why, and this is why we're still going to be able to prove our case beyond a reasonable doubt. They're taking all of this into consideration and putting it for the jury, and they did an excellent job with that with this witness. So today was definitely the prosecution's day, as well as the other witnesses that they called today.
All right. Roshini and Rajkumar, Two for the prosecution. Who do you think had a better day?
Well, I would say definitely the prosecution had a better day. Couple caveats in there. There are definitely more medical experts we will hear from when the defense comes out. So I always tend to be that voice of reason, Vinny, to remind people that there are many elements of these three different crimes Chauvin is charged with. And the prosecution does have to prove each of those elements beyond a reasonable doubt. And over the course of the last several days, we have seen Eric Nelson be able to introduce some doubt into some of the aspects of this. So yes, I would agree, prosecution had a better day, but we're a long way from the finish line in this one.
All right. When we come back, you've heard from us. It's time to hear from you, our 13th juror. And the question was, so far, which witness has had the most impact on you? And we've had all different types of witnesses. We had experts, police officers, EMS, bystanders. Who's had the most impact on you? Your verdict when we return.
As you were there and interacting with Officer Tao and Officer Chauvin, you grew more and more upset. Would you agree with that?
Correct.
You grew angry, right?
I grew control and professionalism.
I heard him keep trying to ask them to let him up so he can't breathe. And then even I said to the officer, I said, man, he said he can't breathe. Have money. He said, well, if he keep talking, he can breathe.
I met Floyd in August of 2017. Floyd and I, our story, it's a classic story of how many people get addicted to opioids.
And doctor, is there another name for death by oxygen deficiency?
Asphyxia is a commonly understood term.
What is your view of that use of force during that time period?
Totally unnecessary.
All right, we've seen 33 witnesses testify so far in this trial, and I posted on social media today. So far, as we've gone through this, which of these witnesses has impacted you the most? We begin with our 13th juror comment of the day, coming from Richard, who said, through all of it, I believe the police chief the most because he knows MPD police procedure, and he said that Chauvin's use of deadly force was unnecessary, plus he worked with Chauvin in the past, so he would know his colleague best. Roshini Rajkumar, your thoughts about the police chief's impact inside that courtroom?
This is an interesting question for me because I live in Minneapolis. I watched everything. I watched my city burn last year. And the police chief's demeanor in the courtroom was actually very calm, was very leader-like. And it was actually in pretty stark contrast to his behavior last summer. So I had to myself just get my brain around the contrast there. I feel that he was probably very coached. He was very calm. He was certainly not a bad witness. But if you remember some of last year, and when he didn't show up in many spaces for his officers and for others, it is difficult for me to take the personal out of this question from you, Vinny, because I was pretty disgusted with this chief last summer. But in court, he was a good witness for the prosecution. He did seem believable. My inside sources tell me he doesn't have a lot of actual street experience. So I also filter that through how I judge anything that comes out of the chief's mouth.
Steffi tonight, his girlfriend, for sure. That made me tear up, the bystanders and the EMTs. Michael Bixon, George Floyd's girlfriend was an unexpected type of witness for me, and I thought had a big impact in that courtroom.
It's tough to say. I think that different witnesses serve different purposes. I think for the purpose that the prosecution was trying to use her for, I think she was effective. I personally don't think that she's as effective as somebody like Dr. Tobin or the chief who testified. I think they overall lend a lot more to the case, but I do think that she brought a degree of personality to it. And so, yeah, I think for that purpose, she was effective.
Teresa tonight, the doctor nailed it hands down. He's a very smart man. The breathing, talking was explained very well. Renee Hill, Teresa, believing the doctor is the one that's had the most impact.
Yeah, I agree with her. You know, the witnesses who testified in the beginning of the case, the bystanders, the girlfriend, all of them, that went towards the emotion. You know, pulled at the heartstrings of the jurors and everyone who has been watching this video over and over again. But at the end of the day, the judge is going to instruct this jury. You cannot decide this case on emotion. You have to decide this case on the facts. You have to decide this case on the elements of the crime, and that is what they're going to need to make a decision here. And the doctor started to talk about, or did talk about, what goes to the heart of this case. Causation. He didn't get to the intent, but causation, a very important element that has to be proven here. So he was a very important witness for the prosecution, and I agree with this viewer.
Teresa is her name. All right. Lisa
Teresa.
tonight writing, Charles McMillan saying you can't win. His words are so true, and maybe his advice might even help save someone from harm's way in the future when dealing with the cops. His testimony has reached millions from the viral video. Roshini, what do you think about Charles McMillan, bystander number one?
Yeah, I mean, definitely hit some poignant emotional moments there. And I think he served the purpose that the prosecution wanted, which was to humanize what is happening for a lot of people across the country when it comes to dealing with the police. But again, we go back to what Renee said. There are elements of a crime that need to be proven in order to get conviction in this case. So I don't know if the net effect of this witness was necessarily a great one for the prosecution, but he certainly did tug at those heartstrings.
Erin tonight, the 17-year-old girl who caught the murder on video. I think we know Erin's verdict on the case, but Michael Bixon, that video is what started everything, and her testimony, we didn't get to see her. The jury did, obviously, but we didn't. But we heard her incredibly emotional on that witness stand.
Yeah, and look, Vinny, I think that obviously the video here plays such a big role in this trial, and we see it played over and over and over again in different contexts. Without it, this case might not even gone forward. And I think that it certainly, I think, was the instigator for a lot of the events of this. And so, yeah, in a lot of ways, she could be considered the most crucial witness here.
Joe tonight, none so far. This is the prosecution witnesses, and all these witnesses did was create a reasonable doubt. If this is all the prosecution has, it will be an acquittal. Renee, what do you? We only have like 10 seconds.
I do not agree with that statement at all. There has been a lot of evidence put forth, and the prosecution is doing their job right now. They laid out a roadmap of what they intended to do, and the case is far from over, but right now they're doing a great job.
All right, what a great job by our think tank tonight. Michael Bixon, Renee Hill, Roshini Rajkumar. Thank you all so much. Please come back soon and help us out again. We appreciate it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's check back in with Court TV legal correspondent Julia Jeanette.